Robin Milam and I met at the Women's Congress for Future Generations last November in Moab, Utah. A transformative experience for me, at least. And we expect to do some work together in the future on the rights of future generations. She's Administrative Director of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature. Robin's a social entrepreneur with a broad business background in internet marketing. And Robin's passion, it is said, is realigning human consciousness and restoring natural balance through the worldwide implementation of the rights of nature. She and colleagues presented 120,000 signatures to the UN Secretary General at the Earth Summit in 2012. And she participated in 2011 in the UN Convention on Climate Change and 2010 People's Conference on Climate Change and Rights of Mother Earth in Cochabamba, Bolivia. So let's start with some definitions, Robin.
Yes.
What are rights? Inalienable, inherent, natural. And are these moral constructs or legal definitions or political statements?
Well, Molly, thank you. It's wonderful to be here. And when we talk about rights, we think of it but I think of it in terms of the moral as well as the political or the legal constructs. Because rights are essentially something that cannot be taken away. If you look at the Webster's dictionary, we think of our right to clean air, our right to life. Mm-hmm. In essence, these are, some would say, God-given rights, but they are our inherent right. And we use our legal system to define what is, from a social standpoint, acceptable and agreed to right. So you can talk about it on both a moral level as well as a legal level.
So the moral level is where it starts, what you're saying, and then it's a social construct, and then we legalize it or put it in the legal context?
Well, if you think about our legal structures, what are laws?
Right.
Well, we use laws to define how we relate to each other as a society. Mm-hmm. And what's important about our laws is that they be aligned with the laws of nature. And it's when they're not in alignment with the natural laws, such as our right to live and our right to exist, then we have a disconnect. And that actually leads into what do we mean by rights of nature and why is rights of nature so important. And on a personal level, as well as working with my colleagues, what we have today is a legal system that defines nature as property to be bought, sold, and consumed. And it's representative of the separation that we as a society have allowed to come about. And so when we talk about rights of nature, we're talking about recognizing that just as we humans have rights, the natural world that actually creates our ability to live. I mean, if you take a breath, you breathe in oxygen that's created by the trees and the environment around us, and we give off carbon dioxide. So we are part of this natural cycle.
So it's interesting. So we have the God-given rights that we're talking about as humans that we may feel are our inalienable inherent rights.
Yes.
But also there's the connection, therefore, so if we have those rights, the truth is we are so connected to nature that nature should have those rights?
That's what we are advocating. And it's the reason, if you look at what we are doing to our planet, the destruction that's occurring has to do with the breakdown in our relationship and the fact that on many levels we're exceeding the capacity of the earth to sustain us. Just last night I was watching a fabulous movie called Chasing Ice.
I've heard of it.
Right, and the point of one of the main themes is the recognition that the glacial systems all over the earth are melting and at a rate that is unprecedented.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what used to take thousands of years to melt are now melting in tens of years or less.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a radical shift that's happening on our planet.
Oh, right.
And what we're doing with recognizing rights of nature,
Mm-hmm.
is recognizing that we as humans are part of a holistic ecosystem.
Ah.
We're not separate from our planet. We're not on this planet, we are of this planet. And it's time that we realign our legal systems to recognize our role, our rightful role on the planet.
Wonderful. So more on that. So put your declaration, the Rights of Nature Declaration, in the context of other rights declarations, such as the Earth Charter, the UN Declaration of Human Rights, and now the new Declaration of Rights of Future Generations.
Well, there are a number of statements around rights, rights of nature. The first country to include rights of nature was Ecuador, and they put it in their constitution. And it essentially recognizes that our nature and the ecosystems that sustain us have the right to exist, persist, maintain their integral systems. There are also more than 24 communities in the United States who have put similar clauses into their local ordinances.
Oh, that's fascinating.
And then there's also, you mentioned the conference in Cochabamba, Bolivia.
Mm-hmm.
And coming out of the conference in Cochabamba is a universal declaration for rights of Mother Earth. And that declaration we hold to be very important. And one of the goals is for the UN to recognize and embrace that document as an aspirational document, much in the same way has been done with the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. When the Universal Declaration for Human Rights was accepted by the UN, around the world, we began to see countries re-examine their own position with respect to human rights. And we began to see countries passing laws and other documents in support of human rights. And so it's a formal recognition that we have a standard that we want to be living by as individuals, as communities, and as a global nation.
So this is not something that's been passed by the UN?
It is not. We came close. I was at the Rio Earth Summit this summer, and I was also, you mentioned, I was at the UN Conference on Climate Change in Durban, South Africa.
Right.
And we have been advocating that the UN accept or embrace the Universal Declaration for Rights of Mother Earth. The closest they had come was a declaration on living in harmony. But we did in Rio see the UN, the future we want, which is the final document from the Rio Earth Summit, included a recognition that there are countries such as Ecuador and Bolivia who have embraced rights of nature in their legal systems. So it's a big step forward, but we've got a lot of work to do.
So it's a political movement and an endeavor on your part to get realization in the world about what's important, but also to have it recognized in the official areas of our civil life.
My work with advocating for rights of nature and the work that I do with the Global Alliance for Rights of Nature works both on, from the perspective of our intention is to change the worldview, to recognize as our worldview that we are part of nature and that the ecosystems that sustain us have the right to exist, to have clean air and clean water as an ecosystem, just as we recognize that right as human beings. So, and we also recognize that it's not enough to shift the worldview because the legal systems are in essence, what govern how we relate together as society. And if you look at the civil rights movement in the United States, you'll see that there were for decades where the people were focusing on how do we change this value around treating human beings as slaves and recognizing women having the right to own property, the right to vote. Leading up to the legal changes were decades of social clamoring and focusing on the moral and social aspects. And then once the law was put in place to recognize that blacks were not to be treated as slaves and that women had the right to vote, we also began to see society shifting. It was like you put the law in place and it becomes an anchor. And so that's why we are focusing both on putting laws in place that recognize rights of nature, as well as the societal worldview, the transformative societal worldview.
So in worldview, along those lines, is there a foundational moral imperative then that we as integral human beings understand what is right for how we live in this world? I mean, how does that relate as far as a moral life, a moral imperative for us as human beings to support the earth and the rights of nature?
On a very personal level, to me, this work I come to it because of my own personal moral imperative to recognize that the values that I've grown up with, and I can see in my own life how separate I have become from nature, and that from a foundational standpoint, morally, I'm no more separate from this plant than I am from you. That we are there is this oneness in who we are as individuals and as an economic, as an environmental being. And it's about realigning and establishing the natural balance that we have shifted away from.
So there's an understanding that we're related.
Absolutely.
Obviously we eat the food from Mother Earth, and it becomes us. It is us.
Yes.
So to separate that and then to destroy it seems immoral to me.
Well, and there's a very powerful concept that I spend a lot of time in Ecuador, traveling with Pachamama Alliance and meeting with indigenous peoples, and you see it in Bolivia and throughout South America. It's a concept that some refer to as suma causai, or it translates into buen vivir, or good life. And it's really this concept of what we as humans are living for, or what their societies are living for, is not the progressive, profit at all costs.
Yeah.
Right. We
material success.
Material success. Globalization is all about increasing material success
and measuring
progress.
Progress.
You have to have more. And in reality, life is about recognizing our connection with each other and with all life. And the true essence, the true value in life, is that not trying to have more, but having that enoughness that is right. And so that one of the things that I'm learning from my indigenous friends and colleagues is this step back and then re-examine what are the values that are driving my actions and our actions as a society, and where are the break with the natural processes, and how can we realign ourselves with the natural laws.
And so living an ethical life in some way is living in alignment with nature.
Yes.
Recognizing that we're a part of nature.
Yes. Yes.
And understanding maybe these God-given rights that we could say are inherent to all life.
Yes.
To all life.
Yes.
Here.
And, not everyone would call this a spiritual path. For me, it's very definitely a spiritual path, because it's looking at what is our relationship, what is my relationship with this planet, with the cosmos, and what are the values that I need to be focusing on that allow me to be fully in alignment with who I am as a person, who I am as a being on this earth. And then being sure that I, as a part of a society, am advocating that my society also be in alignment with the, with the natural world.
Mm-hmm. And does this relate to compassion and care as well? It seems to me as a spiritual path. We would want to understand that we should be caring for each other.
Yes.
We should be caring for nature.
Yes.
And
well, I mean, we, as individuals, in our churches, in our synagogues, we talk about our stewardship. And on the planet.
Right.
And for me, true stewardship is not this anthropological view that humans are in control or need to be in control.
Or the center.
Are the center of the universe. It's the recognition that we are part of a whole ecosystem.
Right.
And that living in harmony with that ecosystem is the essence of living as being in natural balance.
So in natural balance, do you see this as hopeful? I mean, because we're talking about the difficulty and the perpetration of harm that we actually are all a part of, and unfortunately, and in collusion with in some manner. So understanding, our role in that, but then living in a caring and compassionate way can be hopeful in some way. So how do we get over what's difficult?
Well, one of the thing that keeps calling me forward in doing my Rights of Nature work is the fact this work is what gives me hope. Because in recognizing that nature has rights, and recognizing that my place in the natural ecosystem, that I'm not above it, I'm part of it, is the path forward. Because it's not about, I don't have to worry about trying to make something wrong or to fix, it's not about being in a fix-it mode. It's about, let's look to the future. Let's look to what is the truth of our relationship with our planet and live from that place.
So it's facing the reality in some way,
Yes.
directly facing
Yes.
what we're doing,
Yes.
recognizing it, looking at our worldview,
Yes.
and adjusting this with faith and hope that we'll be able to live an integral life within nature.
Yes. Yes.
And so the rights of nature enables us to take those steps, those realistic steps, the declaration and the work that you're doing.
Yes. And it also, I mean, if you pragmatically, my work with the UN and with communities is, we talk about how do we create or advance sustainable development practices and a green economy and those things. Right. And if you are standing in a place of recognizing that nature and the ecosystem that you're getting ready to do, to build a new development on, has the right to exist, has the right to have a healthy ecosystem be sustained.
Right.
If that's the premise you're operating on, think of how you will make the decisions around the constructs of the development, as opposed to over here where our legal systems today treat nature as property to be bought, sold, and consumed. In fact, natural resources in nature in our Constitution, our legal systems, are treated through the commerce clauses. And so if you're over here saying, all right, this ecosystem is property, and I have the right to decide or do whatever I want to with it at all costs, because I'm driven by this profit motive, and more is better.
Right.
So I'm going to just keep taking and
Use
taking
it.
and taking and use it and use it and use it. The decisions that you make are going to be, well, look at where we are on the planet today. And a number of people ask, well, we've got all of these environmental protection laws and the Environmental Protection
How does this
Agency.
relate?
Okay. Well, those were put in place 40 years ago. Is our planet better today than it was 40 years ago?
Much worse.
Much worse. And part of the problem is that the laws that are put in place they're regulations. And they actually define how much damage you can do. So the basic premise of the environmental protection laws is that it's okay to damage the environment. You can only do it this much. And now you're into arguing how much can you damage. Whereas if you start with the premise that nature has rights and that the fundamental right is to be healthy, clean air, clean water, then...
And to be whole.
And to be whole.
Right.
Yes, because we're all part of a whole.
Right.
Then you're starting from the premise of, I need to ensure that nature is, or the ecosystem, this riverbed, or whatever you're dealing with, that whatever I do to it ensures that I keep it whole.
Ensures that you keep it whole.
And ensures that I recognize this natural balance and that I honor that natural balance. Whereas if you're over here treating it as property to do whatever you want with it, as long as you hold ownership on it, then you can do whatever you want.
So we have some kind of obligation as, a part of nature to have enforcement, to act pragmatically to save nature. So this rights of nature, how will that be pragmatic? How will that look? So if we were to envision changing the U.S. Constitution to include rights of nature, what might that look like as a different society?
Well, I can give you an example of what's happening in Ecuador, and what's been proposed in New Zealand, and that is the Vilcabamba River is a river in Ecuador that in the last few years a development was happening, and the developer was pushing the slough into the river and destroying the ecosystem or the riverbed. And the community in the area came forward and filed a suit against the developer on behalf of the river.
Of the river.
And the judge ruled in favor of the river, saying, yes, these are the damages, and instead of, in our legal system, the damages, if nature's treated as property, damages are not assigned to the property, they're assigned to the owner. It's just like when we had slavery, or when women were, if a woman who was married was in some way defiled or raped,
Right.
and then the damages, the husband would go
Was
to
incurring
court,
the damage.
would claim the
goodness.
damages, and it's the same with a slave owner. If a slave were injured by another person and they sued, the damages would be paid to the slave owner.
Oh my goodness.
And the slave owner could then decide, what do I do with these monies? You know, do I treat the slave or not? And in this case, because the river had standing, and the legal term is had standing, the damages were assigned to the river so that the developer had to use the monies had to go to repairing
I see.
the
That's
river.
very specific.
Yes.
So what would you want to say to us, me, regular person, as to why we should be involved and support this movement, this Rights of Nature movement? What do you want us to do to help you?
The future of our planet is at stake. You and I are very involved with the rights of future generations. And we, as a society, are on a path to exceeding the capacity limits of our planet. And in order to ensure that we have a planet that has healthy air, still has glaciers, and
is here for our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren.
We have got to change the way we think, the values that we are assigning to how we treat nature. And if we don't do it now, then who knows what future generations will have. And it's one of the questions I often get asked is, how does rights of nature relate to human rights? And I go, they're deeply interconnected, because you can't really address human rights if you don't recognize that the natural world that sustains us also has the same right to exist. And so they're deeply
profound.
Intertwined. And that's why the declaration that we came out of the Moab Conference for the Rights of Future Generations is so deeply steeped in both human rights as well as rights of nature, because they go hand in hand. You can't have one. You really cannot have one without the other.
Thank you so much, Robin, for being here, for this compelling conversation, and for our future generations.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.